I used to believe weddings were loud by default. Music, laughter, whispered jokes between relatives, the familiar chaos of family gathering in one place. I imagined my wedding like that, not extravagant, just full. Full of faces that knew me before I knew myself. Full of people who had watched me grow, stumble, become. That morning, everything looked right. The venue smelled like fresh flowers and polished wood. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, soft and forgiving. My dress hung perfectly, steamed and waiting, like it trusted the day more than I did. The bridesmaids moved around me, adjusting small details, smiling nervously, checking the time. I checked my phone. No new messages. I told myself that was normal. Families are late. Someone always forgets something. Someone always says, "We're 5 minutes away." I took a breath and reminded myself, they'll be here. When the music started and I took my place at the front, I finally looked out. And that's when I saw it. The front row. Empty. Not one missing chair. Not two. An entire section that should have held my parents, my siblings, the people who taught me how to stand, completely bare. For a split second, my mind refused to process it. Like my eyes had made a mistake, my brain couldn't correct. I scanned the room again, slower this time, searching for familiar faces. Nothing. My hands trembled slightly, but I steadied them. I smiled. Brides are trained to smile through anything. The music continued, unaware that something fundamental was breaking quietly inside me. I didn't stop the ceremony. I didn't whisper to anyone. I didn't ask questions. I stood there and did what I'd always done. I held it together. From the outside, I must have looked calm, poised, grateful, the kind of bride people describe as so composed. Inside, my thoughts were spiraling. Traffic? An emergency? Did something happen last minute? I kept telling myself there had to be a reason big enough to explain this kind of absence. When the ceremony ended and applause filled the room, I clapped too, softly, mechanically, while my heart felt like it was sinking through layers of disbelief. Guests congratulated me, hugged me, commented on how beautiful everything was. No one mentioned the empty seats. They didn't have to. I checked my phone again during the reception. That's when the message came. A group text. From my mother. "We're so sorry. We got the date wrong." I read it twice. Then again. The words felt casual. Light. Like someone apologizing for missing a lunch, not a wedding. My fingers hovered over the screen. I didn't know what response was expected from a bride whose family hadn't shown up. I typed back what I always typed. "It's okay." It wasn't. But I said it anyway. Because standing there in a room full of people celebrating me, the last thing I wanted was to explain why my own family hadn't bothered to be present. I smiled through dinner. I danced. I laughed at the right moments. I even reassured people when they gently asked if everything was all right. "Yes," I said. "Just a misunderstanding." I believed it, at least I needed to, because the alternative was too painful to consider on the happiest day of my life. Later that night, after the guests had gone and the lights dimmed, I finally sat down. That's when the silence hit. Not the quiet of the room, but the absence of voices that should have been there. No hugs from my parents. No sibling teasing. No shared stories about how emotional the ceremony had been. Just a hollow space where family should have existed. My husband sat beside me and took my hand. He didn't ask questions. He didn't push. He just stayed, grounding me in the present. "I'm okay," I said automatically. But the truth was already forming, slow and heavy. People don't forget wedding dates by accident. Not entire families. Not milestones that have been planned for months. Still, I pushed the thought away. I told myself the truth would hurt too much to examine. I didn't know yet that what I'd eventually discover wouldn't just hurt. It would change the way I understood love, loyalty, and the meaning of showing up. And that realization was waiting for me, just beyond the silence they left behind. The days after the wedding passed in a blur I didn't recognize. There were thank you notes to write, flowers to dry, gifts to organize. Everyone told me how lucky I was, how beautiful everything had been, how calm I looked walking down the aisle. I nodded, smiled, accepted the compliments like they belonged to someone else. My family, meanwhile, became unusually attentive. Calls came in short, careful ones. Texts followed, filled with apologies that felt rehearsed. "We can't believe we messed up the date. We feel terrible. You know we would have been there if we'd realized." I listened. I replied. I reassured. That was my role. I told them it was fine. That these things happen. That I understood. I said the words they needed to hear, so we could all move on without discomfort. But something about the excuse wouldn't settle. It wasn't just the mistake, it was the way it was delivered. So casual. So certain I would accept it without question. As if missing my wedding were an unfortunate scheduling error instead of a deeply personal absence. One evening, as I sat with my husband scrolling through photos from the day, I noticed something I'd overlooked. In the background of one picture, there was my phone's screen lit up, date and time clearly visible. The same date we'd sent reminders for. The same date printed on the invitations. The same date confirmed in the family group chat weeks before. I felt a small shift inside me. Not suspicion yet. Awareness. I went back, through my messages. There it was, my reminder from 2 weeks before the wedding. Can't believe it's almost here. See you all on the 14th. Thumbs up reactions from everyone. No confusion. No questions. I stared at the screen longer than I should have. My husband noticed. "What is it?" he asked gently. "I don't know," I said. And that was the truth. I didn't want to know. Knowing would require me to reconsider the story I'd been telling myself. So I did what I always did when reality felt threatening. I minimized it. I told myself mistakes happen. People forget things all the time. Families are messy. Love isn't perfect. But doubt has a way of waiting patiently. A few days later, it returned. This time, in the form of a notification. An old family group chat, one I'd muted during the wedding festivities, suddenly became active again. Someone posted a photo. At first, I didn't recognize it. Then I looked closer. A banner. A crowd. A familiar setting. It was a celebration of some kind. Something loud. Something public. Something that had happened the same weekend as my wedding. My chest tightened. I scrolled back. More photos appeared. Different angles. Different people. All of them smiling, dressed casually, holding drinks, looking present. My brother was in every shot. So were my parents. The timestamp sat quietly beneath each image. The same day. The same time. I didn't feel the sting immediately. Instead, there was a strange numbness, as if my body needed a moment to catch up with what my eyes already knew. They hadn't gotten the date wrong. They'd made a choice. The excuse wasn't just weak, it was untrue. I closed the app and set my phone down, palms flat on the table, grounding myself. My husband watched me carefully, waiting for me to speak. "They were busy," I said finally. "Just not with me." He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct me. He just nodded, letting me arrive at the truth at my own pace. I thought back to the empty seats, to the ease with which they'd apologized, to how quickly they'd moved on. And suddenly, the pain shifted. It wasn't about the wedding anymore. It was about what the wedding revealed. I had been absent from their priorities long before they were absent from my ceremony. That night, I lay awake replaying moments from my life I'd once dismissed as minor disappointments. Birthdays postponed. Milestones acknowledged late. Celebrations half attended. I saw a pattern I could no longer ignore. Missing my wedding wasn't the beginning. It was the moment the truth stopped hiding. And I knew, whatever came next, I couldn't unsee it now. Once the truth settles in, it doesn't announce itself loudly. It seeps, quietly, relentlessly, into memories you thought were harmless. After I saw those photos, I tried to move on. I told myself not to overthink. I reminded myself that families are complicated, that love doesn't always look the way we expect it to. I even convinced myself that confronting them would only create drama, and I didn't want drama. But the thing about realization is this: it changes the way you remember everything. Suddenly, Old moments came back with sharper edges. My college graduation, when my parents left early because my brother wasn't feeling well. My promotion dinner, when no one showed up because it was a long drive. My engagement announcement, met with polite congratulations, followed by questions about whether the venue was too much. At the time, I'd explained it all away. Now I couldn't. One afternoon, my mother called. Her voice was warm, almost cheerful. She asked about married life, about the honeymoon plans we hadn't even had time to make. She spoke as if nothing had happened, as if they hadn't missed the most important day of my life. At one point, she laughed lightly and said, "We'll make it up to you." I almost asked how. Instead, I stayed quiet, because for the first time, I realized something uncomfortable. Making it up to me was never something they planned to do. Those words were placeholders. Comfort phrases meant to smooth things over, without changing anything. Before hanging up, she added, "We should all get together soon. You know, family time." I stared at the wall as I listened. Family time. I thought about the definition of that phrase and how often I had been the one adjusting, traveling, paying, forgiving. How often family time meant my presence was expected, but my needs were optional. Later that evening, my brother messaged me. No apology. Just a link. "Did you see this?" he wrote. It was another post from the event they'd attended that weekend. More pictures. More proof that they had been present, just not for me. I didn't reply. For the first time in my life, I didn't rush to smooth things over. That silence wasn't intentional. It was instinctive. My body finally understood what my heart had been protecting me from. They weren't careless. They were consistent. And that realization hurt in a way I couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't lived it. I began noticing how easily my family dismissed my feelings whenever they threatened the status quo. How discomfort was treated like inconvenience. How I was praised for being understanding, as if my ability to endure neglect were a virtue. I wasn't understanding. I was invisible. That night, I opened my journal, something I hadn't done in years, and started writing. Not about the wedding. About everything that came before it. Page after page filled with moments I'd ignored because acknowledging them would have meant asking difficult questions. Questions like, why am I always the one expected to be okay? Why does showing up for me feel optional to them? As I wrote, another truth emerged, one that scared me more than the wedding itself. If I didn't stop minimizing this now, I would spend the rest of my life doing the same thing. Smiling through absence. Calling neglect misunderstanding. Teaching myself to accept less than I deserved. The wedding hadn't exposed a single mistake. It had exposed a dynamic. And once you see a pattern clearly, you're faced with a choice. You can keep living inside it, or you can finally step outside and accept whatever comes with that decision. That night, I didn't confront anyone, but something in me shifted. And I knew the next time my family spoke to me, I wouldn't be the same person they'd always counted on to quietly absorb the hurt. The next morning, the numbness gave way to something heavier. A realization that had been simmering quietly now demanded attention. The absence of my family on my wedding day wasn't an accident. It was part of a pattern I had ignored for too long. And patterns have a way of repeating themselves until they are acknowledged. I sat in our living room. The wedding photos spread across the coffee table. Flowers from the ceremony wilted in vases, still fragrant but fading, like the version of the day I thought I had. My husband brought me a cup of coffee, silently understanding that this was not a moment for conversation. Just presence. I held a photo in my hands, a picture of me walking down the aisle. The empty chairs in the front row were obvious, glaring. At first, I tried to breathe past it, telling myself to focus on the other side, on the people who were there. But my eyes kept returning to that space, the one that should have held the people who meant the most to me. It was in that quiet reflection that anger began to surface, not the hot, shouting kind, but a cold, steady, undeniable clarity. Every excuse, every story, every "we got the date wrong" text, every polite smile, every justification they offered for their absence, it all suddenly became transparent. The wedding hadn't been missed by accident. It had been a choice. I thought back to all the other milestones. Birthdays, graduations, holidays. There had always been an excuse, a reason why their presence had to be secondary. It had taken my wedding, arguably the most important day of my life, for me to see it fully. Not just in the moment, but in the pattern it revealed. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through messages. The texts from family that morning, the ones they had sent to appear remorseful, now read differently. Casual, light, dismissive. They weren't sorry. They were preserving their image, their comfort. They had said all the right words, but they hadn't done the right thing. And suddenly, the realization hit me harder than any disappointment ever could. I had spent decades excusing behavior that deserved confrontation. I wasn't going to continue that cycle. By noon, I began making calls. Not to apologize. Not to explain. Not to beg for understanding. But to reclaim agency. The florist, the caterer, and even the photographer, I made sure that the memories they had helped create would remain intact for my husband and me, without anyone else dictating their significance. I didn't call to fix relationships. I called to fix what was mine to fix. As the afternoon passed, my phone buzzed repeatedly. My parents. My siblings. My mother's voice on the line. Apologetic, tense. "We didn't mean for it to happen this way," she said. My sister's voice followed in texts, pleading for explanation, blaming miscommunication. Every word, every sentence only confirmed the truth I already knew. Their discomfort was about their image, not my feelings. And in that moment, I understood something vital. This wasn't about them anymore. It was about me, about the life I wanted, the respect I deserved, and the boundaries I was no longer willing to compromise. I didn't shout. I didn't demand acknowledgement. I didn't make a scene. I simply stood firm in my knowledge that their absence, their excuse, their repeated pattern of neglect would no longer define me. I would not erase myself to make them comfortable. That evening, I took a walk alone, letting the crisp air fill the space their absence had left. It was quiet, reflective, empowering. For the first time, I felt the weight of my own worth pressing against the long history of being overlooked. The recognition was painful, yes, but also liberating. I didn't need validation from those who had chosen otherwise. By the time I returned home, I had made a decision. I would continue to love, but I would no longer excuse. I would continue to show up, but only on my terms. And I would finally allow myself the freedom to experience family as it truly existed, not as I had hoped, but as it was. The quiet breaking point wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. Sometimes, the most powerful realizations arrive softly, lodged in the chest, in the mind, in the spaces between words. And I knew, without a doubt, that the next time my family saw me, I would be different. Stronger. Clearer. Fully present for myself. Even if they could not be. The days that followed the wedding were full of quiet tension. My phone buzzed with messages and calls from family members, all filled with excuses, half apologies, and explanations that barely scratched the surface. "We got the date wrong." My mother texted again. My sister sent another. "We thought it would be easier this way." Every word felt rehearsed, like they were reading from a script written to preserve their comfort rather than acknowledge their absence. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. For the first time, I realized that my silence could be more powerful than any explanation. I didn't have to justify my feelings or insist on acknowledgement. The truth had already been revealed by their choices. I had witnessed it. I had proof. And now, my actions would define the consequences, not theirs. I spent those days reflecting, journaling, and allowing myself to feel the hurt I had long ignored. I remembered every birthday missed, every milestone overlooked, every time my presence had been optional while their convenience took priority. It was a painful reckoning, but necessary. This wedding wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of years of small, almost imperceptible betrayals. And now I could no longer ignore the pattern. Instead of engaging, I focused on what I could control: my own peace, my own boundaries, and my own happiness. I made plans with friends who had always been there, family I had chosen along the way, people who valued my presence without excuses. I spent time with my husband, savoring the moments we created together, unburdened by the weight of approval I'd once craved. One afternoon, my father called. He tried to explain again, gently, about miscommunications, about how the date mix-up had been an accident, about how they hadn't thought it would be such a big deal. I listened without interruption. And when he finished, I spoke clearly and calmly. I understand what you're saying, but the truth is what happened. You missed it. You weren't there. Excuses don't change that. And I won't pretend they do. There was silence on the line, followed by a soft sigh. I didn't apologize. I didn't beg for acknowledgement. I simply stated the truth. My feelings were valid, my hurt was real, and my boundaries were firm. That evening, my sister sent another text. "We want to make it up to you." I read it, and for a moment, part of me wanted to feel relieved. But I knew that words alone wouldn't fix years of being overlooked. I typed back, "I appreciate the sentiment, but I am done making excuses for your choices. I am choosing myself now." I didn't wait for a reply. I set the phone aside, letting the decision settle within me. The following week, when my family attempted to discuss the wedding again, I maintained the same calm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I simply repeated what I had decided. My wedding day was not diminished, but my family's role in it was clear. I would no longer allow their absence to dictate my sense of worth. That moment of quiet assertion felt heavier than any confrontation could have. It was the first time I had truly claimed my own space within a family that had long treated me as optional. And with that claim came a sense of freedom I had never known. By choosing myself over their excuses, I realized that love does not require self-erasure. Being kind does not mean being overlooked, and being patient does not obligate me to endure repeated disregard. I began to rebuild my internal narrative, not as the daughter who is always forgiving, always understanding, always accommodating, but as a woman who knows her worth and will not let anyone's choices diminish it. It was a subtle but profound shift. Quiet, yet undeniable. For the first time, I felt fully in control of my life, my family dynamics, and my emotional well-being. And I understood that this choice, choosing myself over excuses, choosing clarity over denial, choosing boundaries over compliance, was the real turning point. I would continue to love my family, but I would no longer allow their patterns to dictate my happiness. This was the day I stopped shrinking. This was the day I stepped into the fullness of my own power. Weeks passed, and the chaos of the wedding slowly faded. Photos had been shared, stories told, and congratulations given. But for me, the aftermath was about more than memories. It was about understanding my worth and reclaiming my power. I stopped expecting anything from the family that had failed to show up. No texts, no calls, no attempts to make me feel included. The absence that had once felt like rejection now felt like a space I could fill with people and moments that truly mattered. I surrounded myself with friends, my husband, and loved ones who didn't need excuses to celebrate with me. The phone buzzed one afternoon with a message from my mother. "We hope you're okay. We really want to see you soon." I read it carefully, not responding immediately. Her words carried the weight of acknowledgement, but I knew this wasn't about a simple apology. It was about timing, about understanding that my presence had value and that I would no longer be optional. I responded gently, firmly. "I am okay. When it is the right time for all of us to be together respectfully, we can talk." That simple reply felt like a boundary drawn in the sand. It wasn't a confrontation. It wasn't dramatic. It was a clear statement. I am seen, I am valued, and my presence is not negotiable. As weeks turned into months, the family's attempts to reconcile became more careful, more considered. They began to acknowledge the impact of their absence, not as an afterthought, but with the understanding that their choices had consequences. And in those moments, I realized something profound. Love isn't just words, it's presence, attention, and care. Their absence had taught me the difference between performative love and real acknowledgement. I also noticed the shift within myself. I no longer flinched at the thought of family gatherings. I no longer felt the need to justify my emotions or apologize for my boundaries. Instead, I approached life with a newfound confidence, knowing that my voice mattered, my feelings mattered, and my choices mattered. The wedding that had once been a source of silent humiliation became a symbol of clarity. It reminded me that being overlooked or dismissed does not diminish my worth. It reminded me that I can choose how I engage with others and that self-respect is non-negotiable. One evening, as I organized our wedding album, I smiled at the photos. The day had been beautiful, not because of everyone else, but because of what my husband and I had created together. And it had been my resilience that ensured it remained meaningful, despite their absence. The memories were intact, preserved by my strength, not their presence. I also began mentoring younger friends and family members about self-respect and boundaries. Sharing my experience allowed me to see how many others had quietly endured similar exclusion and how empowering it was to reclaim their own voice. My story, once private and painful, became a lesson in courage and dignity. Looking back, the wedding wasn't just about a union between two people. It was a turning point in my life. It marked the day I stopped shrinking to accommodate others' comfort. It was the day I learned that disappointment doesn't have to define you and that choosing yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. By the time the next family gathering came around, I felt ready. I attended, not to prove anything, not to reclaim lost approval, but to be fully present as myself. Their behavior had changed slightly, not completely, but enough to respect the boundaries I had set. And I realized that true reconciliation doesn't require forgetting the past. It requires knowing your worth and demanding respect. In the quiet moments after the event, I sat with my husband, reflecting. The journey had been painful, yes, but transformative. I had been forced to see the patterns, acknowledge my hurt, and step into my own power. And I had done so without shouting, without vindictiveness, and without losing myself in the process. The lesson was clear. Being loved by others is meaningful, but being faithful to yourself is essential. I had reclaimed my power, my voice, and my dignity. And from that day forward, I knew that no one, no absence, no excuse, no pattern of neglect, could ever make me feel optional again.